You can trust the news. Why would they lie to us? What happens if the person you go to for the truth lies to you, or shades the truth because the facts don't fit with what they want the story to be? You think that doesn't happen? Think again. Welcome back, and thank you for wanting to know the facts and the truth. What's going on in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is big. You can't miss it on the news. You can't miss it on college campuses, and you really can't miss it online. But what are the facts? Why is this happening? That's what we're here to answer. Our approach is to examine the major themes and focus on the important events that help you make sense of what's happening today. We care about knowing the truth. We also care about the basic human right to live in peace. We care about ending the suffering. We care about finding justice. And we think you're here because you do too. The only path for us then is to go after the facts and be open to what they show us. Life can be beautiful without hatred, violence, and war, and maybe the way there starts with better understanding each other. Better understanding the Jewish people, the Palestinian people, the history of their conflicts and past peace efforts, and some of the major issues standing in the way of forging real peace. What the Hell is Going On in Gaza is a 9-part series made up of 30 episodes, each designed to help you understand a different but important part of the picture. Here in Part 7, we'll continue looking into the things that make the situation much, much worse. They are real problems that have a really significant effect. Here's what we're covering. Episode 25, Religious Extremism. Episode 26, Irresponsible and Biased Media. And Episode 27, the United Nations and NGOs. Here in Episode 26, we'll look at a second factor that is making things worse, the irresponsible and biased media. Let's get started. Rightly or wrongly, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict creates extraordinarily strong feelings, not just on both sides, but across the world. This means that what's reported by the media can have immediate and significant consequences. It can outrage people, even cause protests and riots. In this kind of environment, there's no room for biased reporting or just getting it wrong. Unfortunately, that's exactly what keeps happening, and it's doing real damage. Throughout this war, and in fact for many years before, the press has too often been reckless and one-sided in their reporting. Here are a few examples. 1. Reporting Hamas-provided casualty numbers that are clearly false without mentioning their source. 2. Employing reporters and photographers who participated in the October 7th attack by Hamas and relying on their reports. 3. Baselessly reporting that Israel destroyed the Al-Shifa hospital, then taking weeks to correct the record, long after violent riots against Jews occurred across the world. 4. Reporting the lies of NGOs like Doctors Without Borders who pretended to have no knowledge that Al-Shifa hospital was used as a terrorist base. 5. Calling the exchange of Israeli civilians, women and young children, kidnapped to Gaza for tried and convicted Palestinian terrorists a hostage exchange. And 6. Reporting other proven lies, such as claims of the IDF harvesting organs or raping Palestinian girls, even training dogs to rape Palestinian women. These things haven't happened once or twice. They haven't happened occasionally. They've happened repeatedly. False and biased reporting doesn't save lives, it kills people. It is reckless and cynical, and it's morally wrong. An explosion at Alamy Al-Arabi hospital in Gaza was immediately blamed on Israel. Hamas's claim that many hundreds of civilians were killed in the strike was immediately reported across the globe. Israel showed that the real cause of the explosion, in a parking lot near the hospital, not on the hospital itself, was a failed rocket launched by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, not an Israeli airstrike. But Israel's statements are viewed with significantly more skepticism than Hamas's. In the weeks that followed before the media was willing to acknowledge the truth, there were condemnations, riots, and attacks on Jews worldwide. Direct and serious consequences of a biased media that consistently takes at face value the false claims of Palestinian terrorists. Here's a remarkable example of media bias. The Washington Post wrote about an Israeli family whose son was kidnapped by Hamas. Quote, Omer Nutra has been missing since the October 7th attack on Israel. When his parents speak publicly, they don't talk about Israel's assault on Gaza that has killed over 38,000 Palestinians, according to local officials. Experts have warned of looming famine. This is outrageous. The parents of a kidnapping victim are supposed to focus not on their son who may be tortured or dead, but on the hardships felt by the people whose elected government kidnapped their son? And what about the last line? Are the Nutras expected to speak up about a disputed looming famine rather than speak for their son? An August 2024 Jerusalem Post article was titled, BBC Executive Dismisses Letter from Jewish Staff Highlighting the Systemic Anti-Semitism at Network. The article's subtitle was, The letter provided examples of inaccuracy and bias in the BBC's coverage of the war in Gaza and provided testimony from Jewish employees. One signatory to the letter wrote, quote, the BBC has a systemic problem with its reporting of Israel that often crosses a line into anti-Semitism. The article also noted BBC's refusal to label Hamas as a terrorist organization and its characterization of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh as a moderate. The media watchdog group Honest Reporting has identified numerous examples of media bias against Israel. In this case, when Israel retaliated against the Houthis for their hundreds of rocket and drone attacks, which caused destruction and death in Israel, some in the media called Israel's actions an attack. Quote, there's a problem with how Israel's retaliation for the Houthi drone attack on Tel Aviv is being covered. It is eerily similar to how reports on Gaza are covered, by legitimizing a terror group and leaving out important context. Some publications, like the unashamed UPI, chose to headline their Sunday article by calling Israel's retaliatory strike on a Houthi military target in the city of Hodeidah that is used to smuggle Iranian weapons as an attack. This wasn't a random attack, obviously. Honest Reporting also highlighted a New Yorker article that cast doubt on Hamas's sexual violence against Israeli civilians and asserted Israel was weaponizing such claims for its own benefit. Referencing the New Yorker's article, they reported, quote, in What We Know About the Weaponization of Sexual Violence on October 7th, it becomes apparent that Gessen is not, as any reasonable person might think, commenting on how Hamas used sexual violence as a weapon of war during its October 7th invasion. Instead, Gessen puts her best effort into supposedly demonstrating how Israel has weaponized Hamas's October 7th atrocities. Honest Reporting also exposed the terrorist ties of a CBS News journalist in Gaza, reporting that he, quote, praised terrorists at an official event of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and had contacts with terrorists as a member of the Gaza City Municipality Council. You may have seen that there was a lot of media coverage around the death of Palestinian Walid Daka in an Israeli prison. CNN's headline was, quote, terminally ill Palestinian prisoner dies after 38 years in Israeli custody. The world was outraged. The Washington Free Beacon, reporting on media bias, challenged CNN in an article titled, A Mostly Peaceful Castration. CNN eulogizes a terrorist. Here's what they wrote. Quote, here's how CNN reported the death of Walid Daka. Quote, terminally ill Palestinian prisoner dies after 38 years in Israeli custody. That was only slightly better than Amnesty International's description of Daka as, quote, a 62-year-old Palestinian writer whose death in prison was, quote, a cruel reminder of Israel's disregard for Palestinians' right to life. The article went on to say, quote, Walid Daka and his collaborators gouged out Moshe's eyes and cut off parts of his body, including castrating him. The Times of Israel recounted in 2023 after Amnesty International demanded the terrorist's release from prison. Quote, lastly, they took Moshe to an olive grove and shot him in the head. His corpse was left there to be found. Here's another example. after Hezbollah rockets struck a soccer field and playground in northern Israel, killing 12 children in the Druze town of Majd al-Shams, Israel responded with strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon. However, the Washington Post headline on its front page made no mention of Hezbollah's horrific attack, saying only, quote, "Israel hits targets in Lebanon." The Washington Post later apologized for not providing sufficient context, but that hardly offsets the damage done. The official exit count of the Israeli embassy in the U.S. wrote, quote, "Even with a photo from the funeral of an Israeli child killed by Hezbollah, Washington Post chose to frame Israel as the aggressor in the headline. Shameful journalism." In this post, Ynet News reports that Israeli Defense Forces recovered a Hamas laptop that showed an Al Jazeera reporter was also a Hamas terrorist. Another example is shown here where Fox News reports that the Associated Press's Gaza reporter was actively calling on social media for the overthrow of Israel. Sometimes the media acknowledges the reporting was wrong, but never do they address the root cause of their anti-Israel bias. The point is not to gripe that the media is unfair to Israel. The point is that there is a significant bias that affects how the world sees Israel and how it sees the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and how it sees the war in Gaza. The point is that this perception, triggered by false and misleading reporting, has real consequences. It has consequences for Jews living around the world who are unfairly harassed and assaulted merely for having the same religion as the Jews in Israel. It has consequences in the pressure put on politicians in America and elsewhere around the world who must make decisions about their support for Israel. Sometimes that directly affects financial and military aid. Sometimes that indirectly affects Israel by emboldening its enemies. The media should be a neutral observer, never an active, purposeful participant in world events. But they have been, and that's misled millions of people across the world, fueled resentment and hatred of Israel, and by emboldening Hamas, led to greater suffering for both Palestinians and Israelis. Thank you for continuing to watch this series. We hope you got a better understanding from this episode of how the irresponsible and biased media makes things so much harder. If you'd like to leave a comment or get in touch, visit our website at www.getthefactsmiddleeast.com. There's more to learn, so we hope you'll move on to episode 27, where we'll take a look at how the United Nations and NGOs have contributed to making a difficult situation much worse. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your interest in learning more about the war in Gaza. And remember, where there is no knowledge, there can be no insight.